I'm a storyteller. I've made a living out of telling stories about science and scientists, and I've done it in several different guises. And I feel kind of weird being up here today because my career took a 90-degree turn 3 weeks ago. I'm not doing what I used to do 3 weeks ago, and I'll talk a little bit about that, the different guises I've taken on. So I graduated in 2004 out of Johns Hopkins with a degree in biochemistry and molecular biology and jumped right into doing science journalism for analytical chemistry. And if that makes your eyes roll back in your head, that's okay. I had the same reaction too. I was like, this is going to be a slog. But it turns out doing journalism for analytical chemistry was one of the most exciting things I'd ever done. And it's because I got to write about things like, what are the methods that you use to figure out if Lance Armstrong has been doping? Or, how do you figure out if Van Gogh reused his canvas? Or, what is it that the 1976 mission to Mars really managed to achieve with the gas chromatography equipment it had on board? So I spent 5.5 years pursuing journalistic stories like that. And what happened in 2009, which was 5 years into this job, is that I basically suffered the same fate as a lot of newsrooms did. The recession had hit, and the magazine at which I was working at went defunct. I was out of a job. But that was a bit of a disaster, which had a great silver lining, which meant that I started my own freelance business because I had built up writing clips, I had built up a network, and I was like, and I also had a child by that point. I had an 18-month-old baby, and I was struggling with the work-life balance thing. And so I thought, this is the sign to start my own business. I started my own business, and there I really got to do a whole gamut of things as a storyteller. I did magazine work. I continued as a journalist. I began to do PR. For example, I ran a blog about polymers for a polymer testing company. And again, if that sounds boring, it wasn't. So I was doing daily blogs about what's Barbie made out of? Or is that Coke bottle that claims to be biodegradable, is it really biodegradable? Or there was a fire at a fine chemicals plant out in China. What does that mean for the polymer manufacturing chain? So there was storytelling even in the PR thing. And in about 2.5 years, 3 years into doing my own freelance business, I got asked by ASBMB to become their science writer. And it was clear from the job description that they were also looking for somebody who could do a bit of both, who could do journalism as well as PR. And I joined ASBMB, and yeah, it was a bit of both. I was doing journalism for the magazine, which is ASBMB Today, and I also had to do PR on the behalf of the society and the journals that publish. So I would have to do things for the Journal of Biological Chemistry, like write about the papers of the week, or write about some of the authors, or showcase some of the classic papers that appeared in the JBC. And I also had to write about things that were happening in the society. So that's the PR part. But I also got to do journalism. So I got to write about stories about the controversy and figuring out what exactly is the right vitamin D level that people should be taking. And the quick answer is there is no answer yet. We still don't know. And then other things like that. I also got to write about rare diseases. One of the stories I wrote about this rare pediatric brain tumor, which was possibly the hardest story I've ever written, because it's a fatal brain tumor and the kids all die within 6 months of diagnosis. That went on to get an Excel award, and I was asked to present the backstory of how I got reporting that story at the National Association of Science Writers. I'm telling you all of this is because somewhere along the line, people somewhere noticed this at the American Chemical Society, and about 7 weeks ago, I got a phone call from a recruiter saying, hey, the ACS wants to try something really new. Would you be interested? Because given your background in doing PR and in doing journalism and getting people to tell their stories about science and scientists, we think that you may be able to do this job, but it means you have to go to the dark side. And I was like, okay, so I was intrigued. And so I picked up the phone and I found out they wanted somebody to start sponsored content at their magazine, Chemical and Engineering News. Now, what is sponsored content? I'm a big fan of BuzzFeed, and that's where I first got to know about sponsored content. So that quiz, what kind of dog are you? That was, you do the whole quiz, and I was really upset by my answer. It got Chihuahua, and I still don't agree with that. But if you look at the title, it said, what kind of dog are you? Underneath it said, sponsored by Purina. So a dog food company had told BuzzFeed, hey, go do this content for us. We're going to give you money to do it. Just make it somehow related to dogs. That's basically what I'm doing now in my new job for chemical companies, nonprofit organizations, anybody who has a bucket of money and wants a story told about either their science or their scientific values or the scientists who do the work in that space. So throughout my entire career, in some shape or form, I've been doing storytelling. And by storytelling, what do I mean? I'm talking about narrative arcs. I'm talking about dialogue. I'm talking about character. I'm talking about emotions. All those things that you really don't get to do in scientific papers or in your PowerPoints. So it's a very different type of life that I live. But the goal is the same. It's to talk about the magical things that are happening in science, the things that make people tick. I mean, I always tell people, nobody is born wanting to know exactly how the reaction mechanics are for a certain enzyme. How do you get to that point? How does somebody along the journey of their life all of a sudden become obsessed with a certain enzyme? Those are the sorts of stories that I get to tell. So how do you become a storyteller like me? It really is something that you just do. There aren't any set qualifications. I have a PhD in biochemistry, but I never went to journalism school. Two science writers who I really, really admire, Bill Bryson, who wrote The Short History of Nearly Everything, which is one of the best science books out there, Ed Young of The Atlantic, who writes really great science stories there. Neither of them have a background in science, but they are compelling science storytellers. There's also Atul Gawande, who writes for The New Yorker, who has an MD and also an MPH, and I forget all his other degrees, but he's an amazing science storyteller. There are two things I think that really matters if you want to be a storyteller. Curiosity, just curiosity about the world, how it works, how we can make it better, how we've made it worse, just that curiosity, that desire, that burning desire to know. You have to have that, and you have to love words. And so basically when you say that, I have written all these papers, they've appeared in these journals, and I've presented these posters, they don't show me how you love words. If you say, I've written for a magazine, I've volunteered at a newspaper, I've gone to the media relations office at my university, and I've really embedded myself in there and trying to figure out how these folks do their jobs, that's what I'm looking for. If you show me a blog where you have been getting attention from people and you've been writing about something that matters to you, it doesn't even have to be about science. I even once took on an intern because she had a scientific background, but her blog was on Bengali cooking. And now I'm Bengali, but it was that bias was there, I'm just putting it out there. But it was a cooking blog, and it showed her passion for words, it showed her enthusiasm for writing, and it showed that she had the discipline to write. My world is driven by deadlines. Yes, I have to write. Yes, it's a creative process. Yes, I have fun doing it, but it has a hard deadline. And that's something really different than what is in graduate school. Like, you keep doing your experiments, but you're not held accountable for delivering something at a certain time and day. My life is dictated by deadlines. Clients, magazines, everything, they have a certain day at a certain time. You got to deliver the exact number of words that you were expected to deliver. So that kind of showing me you have the discipline to write, to tell stories. And I should back up and say that these days storytelling has taken on a more broader meaning. It doesn't just have to be words in the written form. It can be video recordings. It can be podcasting. It can be just an Instagram profile that you have where you tell stories. There's one woman who's become really well known for doing an Instagram thing about just her zoology project. Like, she goes out in the field and just does amazing photographs, and she does photo essays about her PhD project. It's about telling the story. And you have to show me you have the discipline to do it, that you have the passion to do it. It's just like science. It may be 3 in the morning and you are working on a story because that's when the right headline came to you, the right lead came to you. You figured out how is it you're going to work this character into your story. So those are the things that I work with a lot. How did I decide I wanted to be a storyteller? Well, I was in graduate school, and this is more than a decade ago, and at that time you could go into industry, you could go into academia, but IP did not exist, and it was very much like if you wanted to do anything else, you were kind of on your own. And I was miserable in graduate school. I hated research, I sucked at it, and I can tell you lots about how I sucked at it. I had to figure out what to do with my life. And that's when, in a moment of deep despair, I was like, you know what, I just need to break out of the lab, and I actually ended up doing a creative writing course, and that's when the light bulb went off. And that's when I figured out I could do storytelling somehow. So I ended up networking, talking to a lot of people, volunteering my time, and that's how, by the time I was ready to graduate, I had a portfolio full of little clips where I actually had I could show people that, hey, I really want to do this, and that's how I got my first job at the American Chemical Society, and as they say, the rest was history. Thank you very much.